Good evening. I'm Kathleen Miklas with the Friends of the Simsbury Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. Before I introduce our wonderful author, I just want to point out the membership flyers that are on chairs around the room and encourage you guys to consider becoming friends of our library. It gets you on the inside track about various events, specifically our author luncheon and our bus trips, but it also makes events like these possible. I'm thrilled to welcome back New York Times bestselling author Ann Leary, who's here tonight to discuss her new book of essays, I've Tried Being Nice. Publishers Weekly called this collection a gem, and a Booklist review called it a collection of sardonic, touching essays that form a composite portrait of a likable, self-aware, and complicated human being and writer. And as a recovering people pleaser of a certain age myself, I've been absolutely loving it. Anne is the author of such best-selling novels as The Foundling, The Children, Outtakes from a Marriage, An Innocent Abroad, a favorite of mine, and The Good House, which was adopted as a motion picture starring Sigourney Weaver and Kevin Kline. Her work has been translated into 18 languages, and she has written for the New York Times, Plowshares, NPR, and Real Simple, among others. Her essay, Rallying to Keep the Game Alive, was adapted for Prime Video's series Modern Love. Anne lives with her husband, Dennis Leary, in New York, and I forgot to mention your pets. I always get the names of the pets, and I forgot Anne. Please join me in welcoming Anne Leary.
Thank you, Kathleen. Can everybody hear me? I have to lean. I'm so happy to be here. I really enjoyed the previous events that I've done here. I used to live in Connecticut, but now I live a little closer to the city. I live in Bedford, New York. So, but when my publicists asked me if I would want to come here, I said absolutely. And by the way, send all your other authors because they're an amazing community, which you are, of readers. And this is a great library. My book came out in June, and so when your book first comes out, you have a lot of events, and I haven't had that. I really haven't had one in a while. So it was actually, I came in, I thought, oh wait, I wonder, what do I do? Oh, I'll read from the book a little bit, and then I'll talk about the book. But this is, I usually write fiction, and I actually kind of prefer writing fiction. But when I do book talks of novels, I never read from the book because I feel like people want to read it themselves and they don't. But also my fiction is really heavy in dialogue. I never notice it when I'm writing, but then if I'm asked to read, I'm not an actress, and I find that I'm trying to do this dialogue, and I just don't like doing it. So I usually just talk about the book. But tonight I will read something in a little while from this. I promise it won't be too long. I also don't. I go to a lot of book events. I don't love the hearing people read. I won't read too long, I promise. So this book, my last novel, The Foundling, I really worked on that longer than any other book that I've written. It took me about 10 years of research and writing, and in the meantime, I had another book published, so I was doing it kind of between books. But that book, which came out 2 years ago, was my first historical novel. It was set in 1927. It was loosely based on something I found out about my maternal grandmother, who worked at a eugenics asylum in central Pennsylvania. I just found that out, 10 years ago or so, and was obsessed, and really, and I still research that and get emails from people who are also obsessed. But anyway, I won't talk about that. It's kind of a dark part of our country's history. But I only mention it because I think after that, and also just all of the kind of interviews I did, I also became very involved in some activists who are working to help people find records of relatives of theirs who were in asylums, 100 years ago. Anyway, I just was so immersed in this for so long. I thought, I just want to write fun stuff, kind of. And also, I had a handful of these were previously published, so I already had a few. But what actually made me how I came up with this title was something I described in the first chapter or the first essay, which is called I've Tried Being Nice. And I will just quickly tell you, we had just moved from Roxbury, Connecticut to, as I said, Bedford, New York. It's not that far away, but it's a really different community there. And we live on a really beautiful dirt road. And when we bought our house, the real estate broker said, I have to tell you, it's the most walked road in town. And, a lot of people walk on this road. And I was like, oh, great, because people will go slow. I like that. Well, we moved in and we have 3 dogs. We had 3 dogs then. Now we still have 3 dogs, but one died and then we got another puppy. But anyway, we had 3 dogs and 2 of those dogs are completely unhinged. The 2 that are still alive, they're rescues. We've always had multiple dogs. We've always had the friendliest dogs that you could, that got children over their fear of dogs. And now we have 2 really not okay dogs. One has a bite history. So we're very uptight about the dogs. And we want to be responsible all the time. So we do manage them. But anyway, when we first moved to this house, I noticed a lot of dog walkers on this quiet road just let their dogs walk off leash, which means we couldn't really walk our dogs on the leash because, again, they're not that bound, they're not that stable. So anyway, there was this one woman in particular who was really bothering me. In this essay, in this book, I call her Doodle Lady because I said that she owned a doodle, but in fact, she owned a different breed, and the legal team at Simon & Schuster made me change it because it was an unusual breed. And since then, people in my town, I've told them the breed, and they went, "Oh my God, I know who you're talking about. She's awful." So I changed it to the dog that I see 100 times. Everyone has doodles on my street, except this woman. She had a doodle, and then another dog, which I called Jack Russell. I don't know. I just didn't want to get sued by this woman. But the first time I saw her, I was driving up the road, and we have this field, and the dogs were running down from the field, and the field was a place where I exercised my dogs. And I'm really into I'm obsessed with dog training. And so I've been working with these dogs. And if the dogs had come onto the property, though, while I was out with the dogs, there would have been a fight. And so I drove out, saw her with the loose dogs, and I rolled down the window. I'm a lifelong people pleaser. I do explain that at the very beginning. And so I did what I always used to do. She's like, "Oh my God, hi, I love your dog," which I do love dogs. "Oh my God, how cute. I love, love, love doodles. They're so cute. It'd be so great if your dog didn't come on my property because I have dogs that aren't friendly." And she interrupted me by saying, "Oh, no, don't worry. My dogs get along with all other dogs." And at that, I had to sit there for a minute and process profound stupidity. And because I don't know, it's like my dog don't like other dogs. They don't care how much your dogs like them. But I said, "Oh, okay, well, it'd still be nicer if you didn't." And we just did this passive, "Oh, okay." And off we went. And so it happened that a few other times I encountered her and her doodle and her Jack Russell running around in everyone's driveway, including my own. And each time I would be maybe a little less over the top sweet, and also I just didn't really know who my new neighbors were, and I didn't want everyone to hate me. So I then rolled down a few more times. "Oh, it'd be better. Oh no, don't worry. Hey, we're good." And then finally one day I look up. My dogs are going crazy, and I see the freaking doodle going down my driveway, and I was like, "That does it. I'm doing something." I decided I had to go really approach the people, but it was I get up at like 5 in the morning, but I write in the morning. So I was still wearing my pajamas. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. And I could never catch these people because they power walk. And I got in my car and followed them. And then I got alongside them, and then I didn't know what to do. So I kept driving. And then, and then I turned around and I saw them, the lady, doodle lady looked alarmed because I realized, oh, that's kind of scary. They know my car. And then I'm coming back. So she kind of was reaching for her leash. And I got up there and I was like, "Oh, hi. I'm the lady, who lives at that house with," and she's like, "Yeah, I know." And like, who else would be driving around in their pajamas in the middle of the day? It'd be you. And so she said something else, kind of, I can't remember. But anyway, finally I said, "Listen, look, I've tried being nice. I don't know what made it come out of my mouth, but I lost my smile, said those words, and she literally like staggered backwards like I had just cocked a gun or something. And I realized I've tried being nice is a really good thing to say. It's like people know, it's almost like when my kids used to say, no offense, but you know what's coming is going to hurt. And I really unleashed on her, like, my dogs. And if someone was irresponsible, I can't even walk my dog. And it wasn't okay. And so I realized that I've tried being nice would be a good name for an essay collection. I have to write about this. And then I thought, I really want to write about this affliction I've had most of my life, which is chronic people pleasing. And I have it for many reasons. I'm female. And a lot of women have this, not all, but a lot of women do feel compelled to always try to be nice to everybody, or maybe people my age. I don't know about younger people, but I can only speak for my friends and I. But also, we moved a lot growing up, and I had to be nice and also really study the people and in order not to be bullied and beaten up everywhere I went. So anyway, I decided I would write these essays with, they cover a variety of subjects and things that have happened in my life. I write a little bit about when I was a kid growing up and, kind of a young mother, but one of the themes I do return to is, this thing of trying to get along with the other people and also being a woman of a certain age. And when this book came out, somebody told me menopause is like a really hot topic. And I was like, really? I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say it out loud. But I did find that this, that experience I just told you about with the doodle lady, it felt like I remembered years before I went through menopause, I remembered reading about one of the positive things that happens when a woman reaches a certain age is that they stop trying so hard to make everybody like them. They don't feel the need to do that anymore. But I thought it would come on gradually. I didn't know that one day I'd be apologizing to the guy in Starbucks who spilled their coffee on me. And the very next day I would be literally the get off my property old lady. And that's how it happened. It happened overnight. I have to say, I still struggle to not go backslide into, my belly up, like, don't hurt me thing. But it's not, I'm a little better, but not 100% better. So I don't know. Has anyone read this book here that is here? Okay, a few people. Good. All right. Well, I'm glad everybody hasn't. So should I read a little bit? I think I'll read a little bit. I'm going to read. I always read something different, and this I've never read to a group, but it's actually is part of this was in that essay that Kathleen mentioned that it was a modern love piece. Part of this, and then it was. Modern Love did an Amazon Prime series, and my essay was one of the ones chosen, and it was very exciting to learn that Tina Fey and John Slattery were going to play these characters loosely based on my husband and me. So that's that. I will read this. If you get bored, it's not that long. Okay. This essay is called Love Means Nothing in Tennis. I think I explained. I took up tennis in my 40s, and now I'm really quite obsessed with it. I play all the time. I'm one of the worst tennis players still to this day, but I do love to play. And I read a little bit. I explore tennis playing in this book a couple times. Anyway, here I go. Love means nothing in tennis. When our son Jack was about 13, I watched him taking a tennis lesson one day and thought, now that looks like a good workout. I assumed that since I was 40, I'd never be good enough to play any real tennis, but chasing the ball around the court for an hour or two a week might help me tone up a bit. I began taking lessons from Jack's instructor. He was the local pro, a preppy, middle-aged man named Spencer. Amazingly, after a couple of months of being able to return balls that Spencer hit softly into my racket, I was able to occasionally hit balls that he lobbed high into the air or torpedoed right at my feet. Eventually, he told me I needed to practice by playing with others. He said that he'd fix me up with people who played at my level. My playing peers often arrived at the courts in cars with handicapped parking access signs dangling from their rearview mirrors. One actually used a walker. She pushed the walker across the pavement, parked it at the water cooler. Then she shuffled over to the court next to her partner, a stooped woman who appeared to have an advanced stage of osteoporosis. My own partner was closer to my age, but she had braces on both knees and one elbow. I'd become somewhat adept at getting the ball over the net and felt that I needed to be gentle with the two old dears on the other side of the court. As it happened, my opponents had been playing tennis since they were children sometime during the Depression era. They couldn't move, but if I hit the ball anywhere near them, which I did a lot as I wasn't great at placing my shots, they'd return it and place it exactly where I was not. They were unbeatable. I began playing in a doubles group that consisted of women closer to my age. They weren't great tennis players. They weren't even good, but they were all better than me. When it came time to partner up, I'd gaze off into the horizon and pretend that I was taking in the beauty of the nearby dumpsters so as not to go through the agony of watching the others try to shove their way over to the opposite side of the net from where I stood. The good sport who was left on my side usually bravely chirped something like, "Okay, looks like Anne and I'll be partners." Then she braced herself for the inevitable battering. Tennis is a gentleman's sport, thank God, so I could trust that my partner wouldn't whack me on the back of the head with her racket when I hit a volley right into the net again. Instead, she usually began the game with encouraging words like, "Nice try," or "That's a tough shot." This through gritted teeth after the ball landed squarely in my racket, and in a fit of astonished excitement, I sent it soaring over our opponents, over the baseline, over the fence, and into the parking lot. So my husband, Dennis, is an actor, Dennis Leary. Dennis was happy to play with me as long as we didn't have to play by the rules. As he repeatedly explained, playing by the rules placed him at an unfair disadvantage because he didn't know the rules and he didn't know how to serve. Instead of learning the rules, he wanted to play a variation of tennis he had invented with another actor while on location in a tropical country. Their game involved no serving and a complicated but curiously malleable set of regulations that often appeared to me to change mid-game almost always to Dennis's advantage. This caused some heated courtside squabbles. I'm ashamed to admit that one year we spent several days of a family vacation not speaking to each other after a game of Dennis tennis that I had lost unfairly. I repeatedly hissed at our children, "It's so unfair." Until Jack and Devin, our children, had to intervene and coerce a truce between us. All right, I'm going to skip a little bit. Though Dennis and I had found tennis somewhat late in life, we had found each other quite early. When we moved in together, I was 20, he 25. We were too young and inexperienced then to know that people don't change who they are, only how they play and work with others. Our basic problem was and is that we are almost identical in looks, attitudes, psychological makeup. Two Leos who love children and animals and are intensely emotional and highly sensitive and competitive with everybody, but especially with each other. When the children came along, we got caught up in the tallying of efforts, the scorekeeping of who was doing more for the marriage and the family and who was being self-serving, unloving, and disapproving. Somewhere along the line, we had entered a long-running silent competition in which we weren't partners, we were opponents. We didn't bicker often, but when we fought, we raged. We began to see a marriage counselor who, among other things, suggested that we have a regular date night. Our apathy was such that our date night was our marriage counseling night. We went to our weekly counseling session, and afterward, we sometimes went to a movie. One of the movies we saw was March of the Penguins. This movie moved us to tears because whatever battles raged between us, however ugly the other one often appeared to be, we had these two very delicate fledglings that needed to be protected and carried along carefully, so carefully, because is anything more fragile than a preteen girl or a growing, unsure boy? These great children were the reason we were in counseling, the reason we were trying to keep the family egg whole. So we worked hard at playing nice. We had regular family nights and took family vacations, and on occasion, we tried to play tennis together. Despite all of this, the marriage continued to flounder, and the time came when we met our marriage counselors. We met in our marriage counselor's office, and I said, "I think it's over." "That's it," Dennis agreed. When we left, it felt as if we were floating. We were so calm. We had stormed out of those doors and stomped down those steps in such rages before, but now Dennis held the door for me, and I thanked him. When we got to the street, it was snowing. I had boots with heels, and the sidewalks were icy. I couldn't walk on the icy sidewalks with those heels, so I asked if I could hold his arm and if he could walk me home. Sure, he said. He didn't care. Neither did I. I just needed something to hold on to so I wouldn't slip and fall. I clung to his arm, and we bent our bodies into the wind. The thing is, he said as we walked, I'm tired and hungry. Let's get something to eat, I said. We went to the restaurant across from our building. This is when we lived in the city. A little neighborhood place where the waiters know our names, and the chef knows how we like our burgers. We sat in a booth in the back. Dennis ordered soup. It was all over. There was nothing to lose, so I decided to serve up my final grievances, the things I felt he needed to know to fully understand that he was the cause of our marriage's untimely end. I reminded him in a resigned tone of the time he did this, the time he did that. These were the wretched rags of resentment, so bitter and old, so petty, that I had been too ashamed even to mention them in therapy. So now I balled them up and tossed them into Dennis's court. Dennis just ate his soup. When it was finished, he wiped his chin with his napkin. We were both so calm. It was as if the island of Manhattan had been gassed with some kind of Valium vapor. I guess there was no emotion left. It was all over, and we both experienced this finality as a surprising relief. We were like the penguin couple in March of the Penguins that accidentally dropped and broke their egg. They looked at the egg for a time, and then they parted ways because penguins don't mate for life. They court each other, commit each other's voice to memory, produce an egg, devote themselves to its care, and when it dies or matures, the partners part company. The penguins, the parents, part company. This was how we had come to view our marriage, as a penguin marriage, a partnership devoted to raising children. We had hoped to stick it out until they left the nest, but now it looked as if that would be impossible, so we were just having a last look. Dennis carefully refolded his napkin and then said, I'm sorry. If I could change those things, I would, but I can't. They're in the past, but I'm sorry. I had expected him to cry foul, to react the way he did when I said a questionable tennis shot of his was out, but he just said he was sorry, and I believed him. He had no reason to make up that kind of thing now. His calm admission inspired me to exhale my own litany of regrets and apologies. In the movies, this would have been the moment when we leapt into each other's embrace, but in real life, we just ordered more food. We called the children in the apartment to see if they wanted to go to a movie. That night, Dennis didn't stay in a hotel, he stayed home. The next day, we all drove to the country. The family, after all that mad jostling, somehow had remained intact. What happened that night? I'm not sure I know, but I forgot to mention that our shrink never believed us when we complained about the hopelessness of our marriage, and he didn't believe us when we said it was over. During the months of sessions, he kept catching us doing this thing in the middle of all the verbal sparring. I would attack Dennis, he would berate me, but whenever the therapist said anything in the least bit negative about either of us, we would jump to the other's defense. The therapist would say something like, Anne, it sounds like your negativity can sometimes create a problem in situations like that. And Dennis would say, Anne's not negative. I don't know anyone who would describe her that way. Or the shrink would suggest that a joke Dennis had just made at my expense had hurt me deeply because I'd grabbed a tissue and pressed it to my eyes. But then he'd see that the tears were streaming from my eyes because I was laughing so hard at what Dennis had just said. I'm one of those people who's unable to fully laugh without crying. The shrink kept pointing these things out, and we'd say, yeah, but all couples stick up for each other. Our shrink insisted that in his experience, they don't. We thought he was just stringing us along for the money. The night that we declared the marriage was over, we said goodbye to the therapist, we thought, for good. We thanked him for trying. When we showed up the next week, he was expecting us. So things got better. We went to the shrink, we went to our movies, we worked at treating each other more fairly, and we started playing a lot of tennis, just the two of us, whenever we could. Only now we played by the rules. Though I had many lessons under my belt, Dennis is the better athlete, so almost immediately we played on more or less the same level. We improved every game. We stopped cheating. Yes, I admit, we both used to call questionable shots out when we were backed into a corner, and we used to fudge the score if we could, both of us. We were still ultra competitive, but now we were becoming increasingly proud when the other hit an amazing shot, and we didn't hate the winner when we lost. We still played to win, but now we could feel joy for the other. We wanted to improve, and now we're actually thrilled to see the other get better too. Dennis and I had a last tennis match before we packed up our son and drove him to college. We had spent that summer knowing we were at the end of something that we didn't want to end. On the court that last morning of our vacation, we had each won a set, and it was 5-5 in the final set. We had reserved the court for only an hour, though, and the hour was almost up. There were other players waiting. This would have to be the final game of the match, but the games had been so hard won that neither of us could bear to lose. Dennis was serving in this deciding game. He served carefully and didn't try to ace it past me as he typically did, too risky. I didn't take advantage by slamming my return into his backhand court. What if it went out? The match would be over. I hit the ball into his court, and he hit it back into mine. I placed the ball in his court carefully, so carefully, and he placed it back in mine. We rallied, not with the adrenaline-pumping determination to win at all costs, but with the patience and control that came with not wanting it to be over. Not the summer, not our son's childhood, not this game, ever. Back and forth, we sent the ball, and it occurred to me there was some sort of grace in my husband's form, and I felt it in mine too, as we both worked to keep the game alive just a little longer by trying to find each other's sweet spot by playing for once to the other's advantage. So that. So that is that essay. It's kind of hard. It's easier to talk about a novel than the essays, but I'd be happy to answer questions if anyone has any, or I would just continue to rattle on. If anybody have any? Okay, all right. So, one of the chapters that I quite liked writing, and actually people seem to respond, well, there were two. One chapter is about we had a bat situation when we lived in Connecticut. We lived in this old farmhouse, and we lived there for like 20 years. So I don't know if you all remember, but probably 30 years ago now, in Greenwich, a little girl died from it turned out a rabid bat, and everyone was freaked out about it. So there was that. And then I didn't know my husband is terrified of bats. It's like Humphrey Bogart with those leeches. That's my husband with bats. He's not afraid of many things, but he's quite very terrified of bats. When we first moved to the country, we didn't know you have to close the flue every night or bats will come into your house. So I write a lot about the different out of control episodes of bats moving into our house, and also just that house kind of, as we had lived in it longer, kind of deteriorating, and not deteriorating. It's just hard to keep up with the house, and we eventually did sell it and move to another house. But that was hard because it was where our kids grew up, and I never lived in a place longer than a few years, so it was hard. I miss Connecticut, but I love where we live now, even despite Doodle Lady. The other piece that people seem to respond to is I write about our red carpet experiences. So again, like we met when we were both really young, and my husband was like an open mic guy, and I don't. He says he always thought he was going to get famous, but I didn't know he thought that. I didn't know that was going to happen, but it did, and it happened after we had our children. So I didn't know really. I wasn't paying any attention at all to him, apparently. And one day because I was like doing stuff. I was like a gymboree with the kids. But one day we were walking down the street, and someone, yelled, "Dennis Leary!" And I was like, "Wait, if I thinking like as a friend." We went to a movie premiere, and it was the first time I was on a red carpet, and it was in New York, and like all these photographers were, taking pictures of us and shouting his name, and I honestly thought like he had broken a law and was wanted or something. Like it was really, so that happened, but also very early on, he was hired to do this movie in LA. So at this time, we were living in the Upper West Side in a rental where we had one bedroom and two children, and it was a dive. And those days are over. But in those days, a studio would put you up in a really nice house, even if you weren't the lead, right? So we got to stay in Santa Monica in this fancy house, and we were there for 3 months because Dennis was making this movie, and they had asked if we wanted a car. And, Dennis would be driven by a Teamster. And he said, yeah, we need a car that's big enough, for the 2 car seats in the back. And when we got to the house, someone from production brought over a black Lincoln Town Car, and we were blown away. We couldn't believe how luxurious it was. We were like, Dennis's father had died. He was like, if only my dad saw it. We had no idea that a black Lincoln Town Car is basically a limousine in everywhere. We didn't know this. We were just we went soon after we received the Town Car. We met his agent and a very famous couple at a restaurant. And when we pulled up, the agent was getting out of his car with his wife, and he's like in a Porsche convertible or something, and he was like dying. He's like, "Oh my God, that's so funny, Dennis!" He thought we were trying to be ironic and funny, and so we went with that. And like every time, I overdid it. Like every time we went anywhere, I was like, "Oh, it's a joke. The car. Isn't it funny?" Well, anyway, what happened with that car was that. Well, first of all, what happened was we drove to another movie premiere in Los Angeles, and we were following a line of limousines and black Lincoln Town cars down the street to the theater. And I remember Dennis said something like, wow, there must be a lot of valets at this thing, right? And so we pull up, and a man jumps off the red carpet sidewalk and opens the back door, and there he found 2 car seats, like diapers, spilled Cheerios. And then he looked, and we were in the front, like, oh, hey. And he said, wait, is that Dennis Leary? Where's your driver? And Dennis was like, he is dying right now. And so we had to go park our car and come back. So, and eventually, at the very end of that trip, a valet at Jack Nicholson, this bar that Jack Nicholson opened that was like super trendy then, a valet crashed the car into a house. So we gave the keys, went inside, and everyone, I don't drink because I also write about it. I'm in recovery, but I write about that in here too. But everybody else, and I also it was like nursing a baby. So I was ready to go home. Everyone else was getting really drunk. And so when the maitre d' or the host, whoever came over, he came at our table with this look like he was like completely pale. And I thought for sure the babysitter had called. It's like I had little kids. I was like, what's going on? And he said, I've got really bad news. Your car is destroyed. And I was like, wait, what? And then he told us that, the valet had somehow driven the car into somebody's house in Beverly Hills. So I was like, wait. And so all the other people at this table, by the way, who were all kind of like agents and like really show busy LA people, they were freaking out, like, what? Where's my car? Yeah, don't let. And I was like, wait, what about the driver? Is he okay? And the guy was like, oh, he's not going to work here again. Don't worry. And I was like, wait, nobody, is he in the hospital? I was like, what is this? Anyway, it was kind of a crazy thing because one of the agents got my husband worked. I wanted to just go home, and the host said, we'll call a taxi for you. And I was like, awesome. And then when he went away, the agent was like, you can't take a taxi. I didn't know taxis in LA at that time were like, I don't know what to compare. A rickshaw. Like it was just like a thing like you don't take, you don't have, or it makes you look. And so the agent literally spelled that out. He's like, you can't be seen. There's paparazzi outside. You can't be seen getting into the back of a taxi. And I was like, no, I think they're going to pay for it. And he's like, that's not the point. Anyway, I'm leaving this out. The guy, first the host said that Jack Nicholson was going to take us home in his car, which I was really excited about because I thought for sure, I knew like as soon as we got in the car with Jack Nicholson, we were going to be his best friends. Like, we've got so much in common. And then as the time went by, it became apparent Jack Nicholson was not going to be nobody. Anyway, the guy came back. He's like, yeah, so Jack went home, but he's going to send the car back because he heard what happened. And my husband, who's the head of Friedrich, he's like, damn right he is. Anyway, I knew what was going on because I was sober, and I was like, there's no way that car's coming back. I went over to the host. I was like, look, just call us a taxi. He's like, thank you so much. And so anyway, I pretended that, Jack Nicholson's car had arrived, and we went out and got in the taxi. And this isn't in the essay, but this did happen. When we got in the taxi, Dennis was like, and to be fair, like he doesn't drink much, but that night they'd gotten, and anyway, he was like, we didn't come in a taxi because the guy got on. This is so. I'm not going to swear. It's so messed up. We didn't come in a taxi. Why are we going home in a taxi? And the guy driving the taxi says in this really thick Brooklyn accent, "What am I, chopped liver?" It was great. And then we went back, 2 days later, we went back to New York, where taking a taxi was like the luxury way to get around, right? Because we usually take the subway. So that was kind of, but I also wrote about, we went to, he produced and wrote and starred in this show, Rescue Me, and it was nominated a number of times for Emmys and then different Golden Globes. So we did have a lot of fun. I think it was fun for us because we did kind of grow up together we kind of became full people before he became, famous. So we were kind of like, it was just like fun for us. Like, oh my God, wait, is that Meryl Streep? Like, it was just really fun. And we really did appreciate, all of the kind of perks that kind of came with it. With that, now anybody have any questions? Yes. I am. It's funny. I usually would have a book, like I'd be halfway through a first draft when a book comes out, but I didn't this time. For a number of reasons, but I am working on a new novel, and I really can't say much about it because I'm actually it's almost like I'm auditioning. I'm not sure it is a novel. I'm writing it, and I'm not sure. But this happened with The Good House. I thought this novel about I had read the story about a psychiatrist who had an affair with his patient, and I didn't know that you could go to jail for that. I thought that was really interesting that in, like a free country, like a person can't have an adult relationship with another person. I didn't know anything about it. So anyway, I wanted to pursue that, and it really wasn't working, this book. And the only because I was kind of writing it from like a third person narrative, and the only time it was interesting was when this peripheral character named Hildy Good, who was a real estate broker, was when I was having her do stuff, the book kind of came alive, and I actually really became fascinated by her character because I really understood her character. So that book was set on the North Shore of Boston, where I moved at age 14 from Racine, Wisconsin. We moved to Marblehead, Massachusetts, and we had moved a lot growing up. This was the most drastic move. We were, in those days, like, television was more regional. Like, I don't know. We were 2 years behind. Like, we were still wearing bell bottoms and people were wearing straight legs. Like, it was just, we came very uncool and completely hillbilly, like, to Marblehead. But I also, I was quite fascinated by New England, by this town, by these people. I had friends who, not only did they grow up in the town, but their parents, grandparents. There was like the Cove was named after their ancestor who lived in a barrel there after, in 1620. And like everybody, it's just like people lived in that town, and they all had, I was just fascinated by their, by what I think is something I still love. It's like this unique persona that is the New England persona. So so Hildy was very much inspired by a few people I know, and a little bit me. But it's funny because I wrote that I think I was in my early 40s, and she was 60, and I remember it being like, wow, what would I be like when I'm 60? Now I'm 62, and anyway. But I loved writing that. There was a character in that book. What am I even talking about? Sorry. It's been a long day. Anyway, I'm going back to this because I just wanted to share that there was a character in that book named Frank Getchell, and he was like the love interest of Hildy. And Frank was very loosely based on somebody in the community I lived in Litchfield County. My sister, when she read the draft, called me and she said, "Oh my God, Anne, you have to change all this stuff about," and she named this guy who has a very distinctive name in Marblehead. And she goes, "That's him." So the guy in the book, he was the garbage, he had a private garbage collecting company. He'd come clean out your cellar. He also had like this lawn that was like old toilets and plumbing because he was a fix-it man. And he was also like the richest guy in town. He owned all this really expensive real estate because it had been his family for hundreds of years. So I, again, was kind of based on a guy or two I knew where I lived. But I had no idea this guy I grew up with was that now in Marblehead. I was like, wait, he does that? I didn't know that. And she's like, yeah, but you got to change it. But I didn't. And then when the book came out, I was at some event like in Florida, and it was mostly women, but this man came in and sat down like this. And when it finally got time to answer the questions, his hand shot up and he said, I know the guy. I know that Frank guy. I know him. He's it's from New Hampshire, right? He named some guy. I said, no, I've never been to that town in New Hampshire. And he said, wait, what? And I know. And I said, I'm so glad because it's like, it confirms for me that there is like any self-respecting New England town has a Frank Getchell, and they're very blessed to have him. And I think that book, even though it was set in the North Shore of Boston, I really drew on the community I was living here in Connecticut. I became a volunteer EMT for the towns of Roxbury and Washington, and my kids grew up there. I knew those are small towns, so it's the only experience I ever had where I knew a lot of people, and I really knew a lot of quote unquote townies, but guys again in that town who were their families had lived there for many generations, and some of them aren't the cuddliest people. They're not people that you would really walk up and hug. But if you're if you need anything, they're there. That's a good New England neighbor. And that's what really inspired me for the Good House. And also the children was set on a lake that was supposed to be like Lake Warramog. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, but sometimes people want to hear about other books. Yes. Thank you. I probably at a young age. So part of moving a lot was we would move in the summer because my parents didn't want to interrupt the school year. But the problem with moving in the summer is that you don't know anybody because you meet your friends in school. So I kind of lived in libraries. And if you, anywhere in the United States, they're the same. The Dewey Decimal System. I knew all my favorite books, which were about like horses and dogs. I knew exactly the numbers in the stacks. I lived in the stacks my childhood. And my mom did read to us a lot when we were children. So I read a lot of books. And I think the first book that I actually explored from the idea of, maybe I would want to write one would have been John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, which I don't know how old I was, but I know I was young because, it's like a big book. And I got a lot of attention from the grown-ups, walking around reading it in front of them. But the thing I do tell parents of younger children is like John Steinbeck is very accessible to children. It's really, especially The Grapes of Wrath, it's very easy. It's a brilliant book, but it's also like really easy for a kid to read. But this book in particular, it has, if you remember, because you probably all read it in middle school or high school, the first chapter is about this like Joad family, and then it pulls out the next chapter, and it's like the Dust Bowl Depression, and then they zero in. And it's the first time I really wasn't just reading to see what was happening in the story, but I was like, oh, I see what's going on. Like there's this cool pattern and this structure, and I became more interested in read how this author wrote this book. And then anyway, I only got to The Grapes of Wrath, by the way, because I read The Red Pony first. All my books before that were about animals. This was the first time, my gateway book to actually books about people. So then I did read, I guess because I read so much, I did want to be a writer. It is something that I did study in college and was involved in a lot of writers groups. And I actually met my husband. I went to Bennington College for 2 years, and then I transferred to Emerson in Boston. My husband had just graduated, and he was teaching a comedy writing class. And the head of the English department suggested I take it. And when I went into the class, Dennis was, he's like fair, and guys that are have ginger complexions, they even look younger than they are. So he was 25, but he looked like he's 14. And so I didn't understand him as a teacher. Anyway, I had a huge crush, and at the end, we started dating, and yeah. So yeah. Well, it's been edited by my mom, but she was okay. I mean, it was good. Honestly, the book The Foundling, it really involved. it was about this. My mom never told me about her childhood. She doesn't, she was like a secret person, and she didn't have, she like I write about that in here too. It's like, I think I called the chapter Planet Mom. She like landed from Planet Mom and was our mother. She didn't have a childhood or a background. But then when I found out what her childhood was like, it was very sad. And, she was, kind of ashamed of it. So, anyway, but she also, other books, she had read novels. She somehow thought, one of my novels, she thought one of the characters was about her, and it really upset her. Anyway, I sent everybody in this book who's not my family, I gave, because Simon & Schuster told me I had to, I gave them fake names. But my family, of course, I use their real names, but I also let them read anything. And even if I have a thing published in a magazine, if it's about people in my family, they get to read it, and I'm not going to have it published if it's embarrassing to them. Well, it always is embarrassing, and it usually gets published, but I do change it. But I mean, kids, it's like kids are embarrassed to be your kid. I don't care if you're like, I don't even know who, if you're a rock star, your kids are going to be embarrassed of you. But my kids don't like to read my books. They don't want me to write about them, so I try not to do it too much. And I do understand it, because I think I don't know if anyone remembers when you were a kid, my mom would, even if she was talking on the phone to a friend of hers, whenever she'd say, "Oh, Anne did this thing," I'd be like, "No, Mom!" Like, it was so embarrassing. So I see, like, oh, yes, it's even worse, and you write a thing, and it's published in a national magazine. So, so back to my mother. She had issues. I wish I could write if I wrote a book about my mother, it'd be a bestseller. I love my mother so much, and she's she's such an amazing person. And so, but she has a right to privacy. And so everything that you read in here is, she was okay with at the end. And I took out stuff that she really wasn't okay with. I have to say too, when I read memoir or essays, and people kind of savage their parents, and I am aware that the parents or other family members are alive, I feel uncomfortable. Like I feel like, hey, so I don't really, right? I don't feel like, some essayists are really good at, balancing the line and making it, in the end, the joke's on them, like David Sedaris, I'll say, but you do get to learn a lot about their family. But yeah, I don't, he doesn't really savage his family, and I try not to do that either. Yeah. Oh my God. Okay, so I'm reading. There's these books that were written in the 19th century. I'm really a true crime nut. Like, I love true crime. I listen to the podcasts. I watch everything. I follow crimes, and in the late 19th century, there were Wilkie Collins and all these authors were writing, because it was like detectives had become Scotland Yard, like this idea of circumstantial evidence and like deducing like from clues was a big thing, and a lot of authors at that time were writing about that. And so right now I'm reading I'm rereading, I've read it before, but Lady Audley's Secret. And I highly recommend it. I had to go to Worcester today. My mother-in-law, I had to go see her, so she's having some issues. And I was like, it felt like I drove there in a minute, because this book is so good. And and it'll get me home. I'll probably be done with it. But that's what I'm reading now. And I'm reading it because what I'm working on now is a little bit related. It's loosely related to an actual crime. So I thought I would read a really good novel. But I highly recommend. The woman's name is, I think, Elizabeth Braddock. But I don't know if anyone has read those books, like Woman in White, and like there's just these great books, that were about. Well, some are about like kind of more supernatural things, but this was really about solving a mystery of a man's death. So anyway, it holds up many 150 years later. So I highly recommend it. Yes. It took so long. So they optioned it like the week it came out. It was huge. It was very exciting. And originally Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro were attached, and it was the most exciting. It's almost like I was like, "Is this? Am I in a dream? What's going on?" And then the screenplay, it went through various screenwriters, and eventually draft after draft of draft after terrible draft, and then Meryl had moved on, and there was and then eventually they did get this couple to write and produce it, and it came out with Sigourney Weaver and Kevin Kline, and I'd never pictured Sigourney Weaver in this role, and she really nailed it. She was so good. It was shot in Nova Scotia, which looks like the North Shore. It really did. They made the town already looked like the North Shore of Boston, but it really did look like it. They flew me up, and they wanted to have like the author do a cameo. Now, my husband's, he's in show business, and a lot of our friends are, but I don't really like to go to sets because you're always in the way. Anyway, my only job was don't look at the camera. I was just supposed to walk by Sigourney Weaver, and I stupidly like there's the camera. I'm like this, like. And it's still in there. It's like it was like the end of filming. They were wrapping for the night, and it's awful. It's so embarrassing. So that was that. It was probably 10 years after the novel came out that it became a movie. I mean, that happens a lot. The movie The Wife was that book came. I love that book. It came out 15 years before that movie came out. The Foundling has been optioned, and people are like, "Oh, that must be so exciting!" I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea. Those people never call me. Like, it might happen, but it's just a very slow process." And I find it as an author, I really like books and writing books, and it's kind of frustrating. Everyone has to be involved. I don't know. Somebody was like, "Why don't you write like a series or something?" And I was like, "Because I don't have to be with the other people. I'm a bit of a hermit. I can't really." So, but it was exciting. I have to admit, it was very exciting. Yes. Yeah, well, so some of so Jane Rosenthal, runs Tribeca Pictures, and her partner is Robert De Niro. She read it. She's the one that optioned it, and she loved it so much, and she was really into this character Hildy. And the first few drafts, the screenwriter decided it was not at all what he wanted to write. He wanted to write this other thing, and she said to him, "Here's the book," and she's like, "I want these lines." Anyway, so it was great that she got the book, and she wanted it to be the way it was, and she wasn't going to let him turn it into something else. So that helped. But yeah, I have to say the Modern Love thing was actually really strange because I had heard that it was one of the essays chosen to be in the series, and then I didn't hear anything. And again, because I know how that business works, I was like, "Oh, that's going to be years from now." And then my son told me he got a text from a friend of his who's an actor, and he texted my son. And my son was like in his 20s at the time, and he said, "Hey, I think I was just at a table read, like an audition. I think I was playing you, and this is really weird." And he's like, and then that's when I found out. He said, Tina Fey is in it, and John Slattery. And I still to this day, I've never met Tina Fey, but she was the character loosely based on me. And then John Slattery, we know, but John Slattery didn't know when he read I guess they let the actors pick, and he liked this one. I guess he plays tennis, and so he chose to be in this, but he didn't know I was the Anne Leary who's married to Dennis Leary. Anne Leary is such a common name. When he found out, like during a table read, he was like, "Wait, what? Is this Dennis Leary?" And then I feel like when I watched it, I did feel like he was playing Dennis a little bit. But that Sharon Horgan was the director, and she's a really talented writer and director. So she wrote this from a very short essay, Modern Love essays. I think they're like 8 or 1,200 words. They're really short. She had to write a half an hour long screenplay. So she added all this stuff to it, and it was just interesting, but it really didn't really resemble us, but it wasn't. So anyway, it was a strange thing. And it was also kind of funny in that we only have 2 children, so they're always like, "Oh, do you like him or Matt?" But my daughter's always told me that our son Jack is the golden child, and she's not. So in this thing, Jack is like this great kid in this show, and he's called Jack. And our daughter has a different name. Like her name is Devin, but they called her like Elizabeth, and she was horrible. She's like, "Ah." It's like confirmed as like, see, and I had nothing to do with it. So anyway, yes. Yes, my daughter is. So, okay, my daughter has a Substack. So, my daughter's worked on multiple television shows in writers' rooms. So she started out at the Daily Show. She worked there for years. She ended up being a segment producer. She started as an intern when she was in college, and now she worked on Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. She's as a writer's assistant. But she's also written some pilots and some sample scripts, and she writes this Substack. It's just, if you want to read it, I think you can read it for free. It's Devin Leary, Devin. I think it's called For the Drama, and she's honestly, people tell me this, and they're right. They're like, she's the actual best writer in your family. She really is. And our son is doing a great job as a producer. He's working now in Ireland on a series there. So. Yeah. So, yes. Sorry? Thank you. I didn't know. So Substacks, I'm not the person to tell you, because a few of my friends who are writers started posting these Substacks. Like, they would write really beautiful pieces and then they just post them. And one of my friends, I said, "Why are you doing that? It's like, you're save it, like you're just giving it away." It's like, I had a blog that I was very active, and then I was like, well, I don't know, I think I should just write for anyway. But I didn't know that you could pay. Some people subscribe to Substacks, and anyway, it's sort of like a blog used to be, but you can subscribe or you don't have to. I think a lot of people have Substacks. A lot of famous people have Substacks, and the famous people, you have to subscribe. So it's I think anywhere from $2 to $5 a month or something. But I think people like my daughter and fledgling writers, you can subscribe, but you don't have to. So that's what a Substack is. I'm not doing it justice. They're very people get book deals from Substacks. I guess they're kind of like today's blog, but there is some way of making money. My daughter told me she made like $30 last year doing it. So, it was very exciting. But I think actually people do make good money that are famous. So anyway, yes.
So you sit down in the morning to read, and you're working on a book. How do you think of how the story's going to go?
Well, so I like to write in the morning because I happen to be a morning person, and I'm the most confident and actually the most clear-headed in the morning. And as the day goes on, the confidence kind of wanes and is replaced with shame and self-loathing. And so I can write something mid-morning and be like, wow, okay. It's not a masterpiece. It might be a minor masterpiece I've written here. And then that very day after lunch, I will return to the exact same passage and read it, and my face actually burns with shame because it's awful. So I actually have learned to stop writing in the early afternoon and just don't even look at it. I can't look at anything I've written late in the day, because it's just a weird thing I have where I guess it's called sundowning when you're. It's just that's what I. But so I like to write in the morning, but I also sometimes I do a lot of library talks, and sometimes there are talks with people who are writers or aspiring writers, and it's something I've learned between after my first book or two. I learned this trick, which is that I used to, if a book started working, which it has to at some point, or you have to scrap it, but once a book's working, if I was working on a chapter that suddenly came alive, I would keep writing and writing into the night because I wanted to get it all out. And then the next day I'm kind of back in the doldrums again because I wrote it all out. And so now what I do is I really make it a point. I stop at 1:30. I stop at 2. And then, especially if it's alive, I just stop, because then the next morning it's, I can't wait to get back because it's still alive. It's still I'm getting back to this really active scene that I was writing. And so that's a thing, is like, don't keep, don't write yourself out too much in the day. But so I like to write in the morning. I try to write every day. And then when I'm working on a novel, I don't read a lot of contemporary. If I'm writing contemporary fiction, I don't read much contemporary fiction, and I read more, you know, older works of fiction or nonfiction. It's just, and then when I was writing The Foundling, which was set in the 1920s, I didn't read current books set in the 1920s. I actually read a lot of books that were written in the 1920s because I just really wanted to get a sense. It really was, as you know, everyone knows, the way people talk changes, and the way I hate anachronisms. So I just read a lot of like Theodore Dreiser and obviously, Hemingway and stuff. But Dorothy Parker, I read a lot of. It gave me a great excuse to read these great books. But also, I just wanted to explore what life was like then. I really actually. When I was writing that book, I thought, oh, now I know why there are authors who only write historical fiction. It felt like cheating. I found it so helpful to have a time frame. Like I knew my grandmother worked at this place in 1929 to 1933, but then that was the Depression. I was like moved it to 27, so there wasn't the Depression. And then, I just was kind of like, the stuff I found out about the place and about the time helped me with the structure of the novel. I usually find it's easiest for me to create interesting characters. It's what I love to do, and write scenes. But plot is something I struggle with, and often anyway. I knew the plot, and it was. I found it quite enjoyable, although it did take a lot longer than other books that I've written. So anyway, yes.
Two questions. How do you feel about audiobooks? Any of your work available as an audiobook? And second of all, have you ever been asked to write the screenplay?
Yes and yes. So audiobooks, all my books have been audiobooks, but the novels are narrated by actresses. This is the only book that I do the narrating. And the town we live in happens to have a great producer, and my husband has worked with him doing voiceover work, and he has produced like 1,000 audiobooks. So he was so helpful to me because I was very anxious. I don't like who likes their voice, but I really don't like my voice. And he really directed, and I never really knew. Oh, by the way, The Good House, Mary Beth Hurt won an award. She won like an Audie award or something because she did such a great narration in that. So anyway, I was just intimidated, and he really helped me. And it really did need to be read by me because I wrote these essays. I knew how I wanted them to be read. And so, but I was quite mortified. I had to go back. It only took, I was surprised, like 4 half days to do the whole, it's like the shortest book I've ever written. But then he had me come back because there were a few things that Simon and Schuster Audio or something, they had issues, and he, unfortunately, like I could hear, he wanted to match my tone, and I heard what he had already recorded, and I was like, wait, what? No. And he's like, stop, you're fine. But I don't know, people tell me they like the audiobook, but what are they going to say? It's me. Anyway, so.
And the screenplay. Have you been
Oh,
asked to write a screenplay?
right. Yeah, no, but you asked something else too that I wanted to. Yeah, no. So I actually I wrote a draft of The Good House in between writers. I have written a couple of screenplays. I did go through, before I was ever published, I wrote a couple of spec scripts. I actually had a short film that I wrote. It was on Showtime. There was a series. They did this thing, The 7 Deadly Sins, and I wrote the one on lust, the sin lust, everybody's favorite sin. And and I had a story credit on something else. So, but yeah, no, I actually do I find it easy to write scripts because I really like dialogue. I write heavily with dialogue. And so I feel that, I never can remember who the writer is who said the hardest thing in a novel is actually getting a character from one room to the other because it's in an interesting way. And so with screenwriting, you're just like, people are talking, and then you can just, and all the action is on the page. It's never going to be on the screen, so you can write it any way you want. But that's what I find interesting about screenplays. And my whole family were movie fanatics, so I do love reading screenplays and watching films. But I do really like, I'm just like a very, no one believes it, but I'm very, what's the word? Lazy, shy? I don't know. I'm a, introvert, and it doesn't seem like it, but I love to do stuff like this, but then like for 2 days, I'll be like, oh God. And now I have to just like lie down with my dogs. But so I don't know. I just find it's really nice. And a lot of writers I know are like me. They just like to be working on things by themselves. And then when an editor comes in, I've been really lucky and had a few different editors, and they all were great. And a great editor really does help you sort out what's going on with the book. The Foundling was 100 pages longer the first draft. My editor was like, okay, this thing about the strike at the mill has nothing to do with the story. I know you're interested in that. And I was like, but it happened. And anyway, so yeah, an editor will help you decide. Well, you'll say like, no, that doesn't belong, or how about more of this? I found that I worried there was, the copy editing is another thing that's really tricky when you're a writer. So copy editors, you never meet them. Like they're like these pod people someplace they live, but you know your editor, and they're usually really great. I've liked my editors, but the copy editors get really angry, and they write with a red, or they used to. Now, one of my books, the woman, she was using a red pencil, and she was so angry she like tore the page at one point. And they save you. So that particular editor, it was like a continuity thing. I wrote a chapter about Christmas, and then like 2 chapters later, it was Thanksgiving. It was just because I'd written so many drafts. Everything, the time, the kind of everything got out of thing. And anyway. So yeah, I find honestly, I'm exhausted. I don't know that. Yes, thank you. Anybody else? Well, I thank you all for coming. I have to say, bookstores. The Foundling came out right at like towards the. I know it's still COVID, but like the end of like heavy COVID. It came out in 2022, and that I was like the first in-house author, like in-store author for a lot of bookstores, and a lot of bookstores didn't survive COVID. And I just learned from Kathleen that you no longer have an independent bookstore up here. And so, yeah, I mean, so it's like, it's really, libraries are so important, and book groups are so important. And I really thank you all. Like, this is not the first time I've come here, and there's been a really amazing group. And it really is, you don't know how inspiring it is for us authors. We really appreciate you. And I thank you for coming.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.